What's so great about learning to write by hand, especially writing in cursive, when we live on our screens? I hear it more than you think. Honestly, teaching students to write, especially in cursive, is a touchy topic. It seems so benign. It's just writing. What's to get all hopped up about, right? But we do. While printing seems to be pretty firmly established still as a norm in kindergarten and first grades, penmanship and certainly cursive are not. And why not? That answer is simple: time and keyboards. In case you haven't guessed, today is all about the importance of physically writing. I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of 5, and this is the Teach Joyfully podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Are you missing out? Team H.O.P.E Insiders get extra encouragement, tips and tricks, surprise freebies, and more. Become a H.O.P.E Insider today and get access to all kinds of freebies at www.hopeineducation.com/vault. I'll be honest with you, there was a time in my teaching career when I thought cursive was not that important until I started reading the research. Handwriting is not a waste of time. It's a slow down so your students can speed up later strategy. Let me explain a bit. Writing by hand, both printing and cursive, activates parts of the brain that control learning and memory. This in turn opens the brain to new learning. Pretty cool, right? Well, that's only the tip of the iceberg. Now, I get that you're busy and you have a ton of things that your students need to learn before the end of the school year. And I also understand that many schools and districts require a certain amount of minutes on programming for students, whether it is iReady or Dreambox or all the other programs that are out there. So that makes it hard. Your students are required to be on keyboards part of their day. Well, that's a whole other problem, and we'll talk about that in another episode. But carving out time for your students to practice their penmanship and to really get good at writing by hand is not a waste of time. Writing by hand activates parts of the brain that control learning and memory. It synchronizes brain waves to stimulate more electrical activity. In fact, the activation that writing by hand produces has been shown to open the brain to new learning. Now that's a win, right? In 2020, the Norwegian University of Science and Technology did a study on 12-year-olds. They were specifically focused on writing, cursive, typing, drawing, or printing. And they found that cursive produced the best learning and memory of the material, with printing coming in second and typing dead last. And there's a few reasons why. Writing by hand increases our motor skills, which positively impacts cognitive development in language learning, academic achievement, attention, and working memory. Now, both printing and cursive increase our motor skills, which activates the brain, gets it ready to learn, and helps get the brain hemispheres to work together. So why is this? Well, there's lots of reasons why, but one reason is crossing the midline. When we cross the midline, we stimulate synapses and especially increase them between the hemispheres, getting the brain halves to work together. It's not just random movements that do this, but having synchronized, purposeful movement. That means we need to be thinking as we're doing it, not just randomly doing motions, in order for this to be beneficial. We already know how important crossing the midline is for developing communication between the brain hemispheres, but it's also important physically for students to be able to write, read, and even do tasks like tying their shoes. But did you know that crossing the midline sets the brain up with neural pathways that are the foundation for higher level thinking skills? Yep, the things we didn't know, right? And according to an article in Psychology Today, accumulating evidence suggests that not learning cursive handwriting may hinder the brain's optimal potential to learn and remember. Now, here's my take on this particular study. This study was done with 12-year-olds, and 12-year-olds typically are learning cursive. Do I believe in the benefits of cursive handwriting? Yes, I do. But I also believe that just learning to print well can be just as beneficial as learning cursive handwriting. Learning cursive handwriting appears to take that brain integration to the next level, and why wouldn't we want to give that to our students? But overall, writing by hand creates this functional specialization, this connection and communication between the auditory and language centers, and that's essential for learning to read and write well. Our brain hemispheres working together, especially working memory and encoding new information, is something that all of our students need to be able to have. It is essential for students to be successful not only in school, but later in life as well. And in addition, writing by hand patterns the brain. Think those neural connections, right? So the brain hemispheres are talking to each other. They have to work together. They're crossing the midline. Typing does not do this. It's actually been shown that typing does not do any of this. Cursive especially creates a connection between eye-hand coordination and the brain. Writing by hand, and even further, more specifically cursive, creates special connections between eye-hand coordination and the brain. They are essential for students in their learning. Not convinced? Earlier research done in 2012 by James and Engelhardt showed that young children who wrote by hand, not typing, tracing, or copying, actually created a reading circuit in their brain. That means it lays the groundwork for processing of letters, orthographic information in the parts of the brain needed for reading. What's not to love about that? And when we don't do this, when we have children who are tracing, filling in, coloring, doing those kinds of things with letters instead of actually learning to write them and have to produce them, we are hindering our students in reading. Why would we do that to our students? So why is this reading circuit created? Well, it all comes down to the full sensory motor brain integration. The fine, precise movements of writing by hand, the drag of the pencil or pen on the paper, the sound of that as you're writing, the sound of the paper, the pen, or the pencil, seeing the letters as you write them, the movements that activate the brain, and having to encode as we remember the letter, remember how to write the letter, and begin to produce the letter. All of those pieces have to integrate fully in order for us to write by hand. And this is what creates that reading circuit in the brain. You're activating so many different parts of the brain just by physically writing. Can you write on a digital screen? Yes, you can write on a digital screen. The benefits are slightly less, but not significantly enough that I think it makes a difference. All of this makes learning stick, and that is our goal, isn't it? We want our students to remember their learning. We know that physically taking notes by hand actually embeds the information better in the brain than typing them. The benefits aren't just for young children, the benefits are throughout our life. And so, yes, we are building all of these processes and pathways in the brain when we're young, but we can maintain them and continue to make them stronger and also continue to enhance our memory and keep our brain active as we're older if we continue to write by hand. So am I saying that you should never type and your children should never stare at a screen? Of course not. As students get to 3rd or 4th grade and up, they might use a keyboard to write an essay, but take notes by hand. They may do a lot of their work by hand. However, when they're producing a finished product or when they're actually doing something where it's going to have to be translated into a finished product, that's where we need to look at keyboard use. There's different times when you can use writing by hand and when we would use a keyboard. It's just separating those out and picking and choosing when it's most appropriate to use a keyboard and when we should be doing something by hand. It has become so easy for us to simply assign projects and questionnaires and digital resources for our students on pretty much everything. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I have to say, your students should be physically writing and manipulating more than they're on that keyboard. It's all about balance. We really want our students, especially our elementary grade students, to be off the keyboard more than they are on the keyboard. And when your students are on the keyboard and on those screens more than they are actually physically doing things, especially writing and producing, then we need to rethink what we're doing. And I know those are fighting words for a lot of teachers because our digital world has made things so easy. So many of these digital things that students do are self-grading. That makes our workload less, doesn't it? It's so much easier than having to grade things that students are doing. However, we can find a balance, do most of the work and practice in a physical realm, and then they can do something digitally as an assessment. Find a balance between sometimes doing a digital assessment and sometimes doing a paper assessment. It really is about balance. And I know my husband hates it when I say this, moderation, 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 but it's true. We get so caught up, and it's been so easy to start going into that digital realm deeper and deeper that sometimes I go into classrooms and those students are hardly ever off their screens, even in first and second grade, and that's scary. It's time to put the screen away and do more physical writing. So take a minute, check yourself and check your students throughout the day. How much are your students on their screens and how much are they actually physically writing? It may be time to make a few adjustments. Maybe you have a good balance already, and that's great. But if you don't, seriously consider making some adjustments. I have a quick cheat sheet for you that you can download. It has clues to whether or not your students are having trouble crossing that midline. It's a quick checklist for you. So we often think our students are doing just fine. They write fine. They're crossing that midline. They're not having any problems. They've already developed all of those pathways. Well, one, you can't ever develop those pathways enough, but there are sneaky ways that students get around crossing the midline. So I have a cheat sheet for you so you can take a look and check to see, are your students really crossing the midline or have they found sneaky ways around it? So that's it for this episode of the Teach Joyfully podcast, my teacher friends. My sincere thanks to you, my listeners, for tuning in, and for those of you who have taken the time to post a review, email me your thoughts, or DM me on Instagram with your feedback or topic requests. You can find the show notes and all the resources mentioned in this episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. And remember, a happy teacher is a good teacher. Until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.